Well, good morning. Again, it's good to see everybody today, and I hope that you are excited. I thank you very much for giving up your time on a Sunday morning. You could be sleeping in, you could be doing yard work, maybe. You could be doing a number of other things, but we appreciate that you've chosen to taking time out of your Sunday morning, out of your weekend to join us here. And my prayer has been for you, even though I didn't know whether or not you would come. My prayer has been that you would leave through those doors different than when you came in. That God would work in your heart, work in your life, and challenge you through His Word. And I'm excited. I'm excited to see what He does. He's already been working through the songs, through prayer, through relationships, and I look forward to Him continuing to do that this morning through His Word. Before we get into our series and continue in the book of Proverbs, I just wanted to point out and make a note of the cards on your seat. I've said this enough times now that hopefully it's not offensive to you. Those cards aren't for you. I'm assuming you're going to come and you're going to help. Those cards are for you to invite your neighbor, for you to invite your friend, for you to invite somebody to come to the block party on August 10th. We look forward to this. This is a big deal for us. That we set up the parking lot, we set up games, we set up inflatable things for kids, we set up a dunk tank, we give food away, and all of it is free. And we're excited about it, but we can't give away all that stuff if people don't come. And so we're doing what we can to get the word out, but we need you to invite those who are close to you but far from God. People that you want to have a relationship built with this church, built so that someday they may be able to walk through those doors because they're ready. And so we think that the block party is a great way to build a relationship with our community, a great way to get to know our neighbors. And so I'm asking you to take one of those cards and give it to somebody and say, hey, would you consider coming? It's free. You can come anytime between 4 and 7. It's a lot of fun and free food, all those things. And the thing I get most excited about is the giveaways. We want to give away as many gift cards as we can to people who come. When they fill out a registration card, we put their name in a bucket, and we just start pulling names to give gift cards away. And we can't do that, though, if you don't bring gift cards. If you don't go out and consider, can I be a little bit generous with this? Can I buy a $10, a $25, however much you want, gift card to a restaurant, to a gas station, Walmart, whatever it might be. If you would do that, there's a box on the information desk for you to put those gift cards in. There's plenty of time to do that. You can bring them throughout the week. But the more gift cards we get, the more generous that we can be as a church to our neighbors in our community. And it is, I love giving all of it away. And like I said, last year we gave away over $1,000 in gift cards. And it's the best. It is the best feeling to know that we are being generous with our community, that we are loving them, and we are showing them that God cares for all of them and that we are here for them. And so please, would you consider helping us August 10th? Would you consider bringing gift cards to help us for August 10th? And would you invite somebody so that they can come and be a part of it? And then you come and be a part of it too. We don't usually put an age limit on the big slides, so if you want to come, go down the slide or bounce around the bounce house, it's okay. If there's little kids, we might have to pull you out. It's a little weird, but hey, come and join us and be a part of that. We're really looking forward to it. There's a lot more cards at the information desk. Grab a few, take them, pass them around your neighborhood. They say that 50% of the people you invite actually come to things. So invite 4 people and maybe 2 will come, right? Or maybe you've got better odds and you'll get all of them. That would be fantastic. Again, I'm glad you're here. We're in a series right now in the summer in the book of Proverbs, and you can turn to Proverbs chapter 22. That's where we're going to be looking this morning. Proverbs chapter 22. If you grabbed one of the Bibles in the back, in the tan Bibles, the smaller ones, it's going to be on page 846. In the dark brown Bibles, it's going to be on page 560. We're going to be in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 2. But really, the purpose this summer is to help us with our goal, because our goal, if we're Christ followers, should be to want to navigate life and its situations in a godly way. That when we run into situations, difficulties, troubles, or blessings even, things that come across that we just weren't expecting, we want to navigate those things and handle those situations in a godly way, in a way that God will be satisfied with. And that's why we're looking at this book this summer, the book of Proverbs, because its purpose is to help the reader gain godly life skill, to do life well, to live life well, to live a successful, godly life. And so that's what you're hopefully in for this morning, is you'll leave with another practical, godly life skill, a way to look at life that will help you handle situations better in a way that satisfies and honors God. If you know me, you know one of the things is I love to read. There are people probably that well, we just moved into a new house, and I had more books than I thought I did. I thought I had pared them down. There are people that own way more books than me. I'm not even going to look at my sister, but there are people that own way more books than me. However, I own a lot of books, but even if I don't own the most books, I would be willing to bet that I probably reread my books more than most people do. I don't think I own a book that I haven't read 3 times at least. I reread books all the time, and I'm a hard copy kind of guy. I like to have the hard copy on my shelf. I like to be able to go back through and browse my own library and think, I haven't read this one for a while. I have a Kindle that my parents got me a number of years ago, it's nice, but I like to have a hard copy. In fact, there have been times where I have read a Kindle version and thought, I really want to have that one in a hard copy. And even though I own it, right? I own it, I have the digital copy, but like something about having the book it's the smell. You know what I'm talking about. If you're a book person, you know what I'm talking about. But please don't lay the book face down. It breaks the binding. And don't do one of those like this thing. This is, you novice. That's Bush League. That's not, nobody does that. You got to be careful with those. But like I said, we just moved into our new house last weekend, and we're unpacking all of our boxes, and I haven't gotten to my book boxes yet because we have to figure out where Kate won't let me put all my Star Wars books where everybody can see them. So I have to hide them somewhere. But I'm looking forward to getting them all unpacked, and being able to go. I love to read. I love adding to the collection. But here's the thing about me, and maybe this is true of you, maybe not. I absolutely judge a book by its cover. I love books. I love reading books, but I mean, they tell you not to, but I always judge a book by its cover. If I'm at the bookstore, if I'm at the library, like the cover is significantly important to me. I always judge a book by its cover. If you want me to read the back of the book, or if you want me to read the leaf on the inside of the book, then the book itself has to have a well-designed cover. You can tell a lot about a book by its cover. I think you can tell a lot about a book by its cover. You can tell the target age of the audience. If you just by looking at the cover, you can tell what age group is this written to. It's easiest to tell with like the youngest ages, but you can tell looking at a book by its cover the target age. You can tell if it's a romance novel. You can tell if it's a Christian romance novel, right? Because you can tell by looking at the cover. You can tell if it's going to be intense. You can tell if it's going to be relaxing. You can tell how much funding the publishers have. By the cover. If you read books a lot, I think you can actually tell often by the cover of a book whether it's going to be worth reading for you or not. If you read books, if you're a book person and maybe you've experienced this, you can probably tell right away looking at a book that's not going to be worth my time. We can disagree on that. That's cool. And I mean, we learned last week, right? I'm not going to argue that point. I'm willing to be wrong about it. We can disagree about judging books by its cover. I'm good with that. But the point is, the rule of thumb, though, that I'm ignoring is never judge a book by its cover, right? You hear that all the time. Never judge a book by its cover. Because you never know what, inside might be the best story ever, and you're going to miss it because you pass by it because you think it doesn't look right. I think that's absolutely true. I think it's true. Never judge a book by its cover. I just don't think it's true about books. I think that you should absolutely judge books by their cover. I think, and we always use it, I don't think I've ever heard that phrase used about books. We always use it about people, and it's absolutely true. When it comes to people, you can never judge a book by its cover. It's not just true, it's also biblical, and it's also a godly life skill to learn. Never, ever judge a book by its cover when that book is a person. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 2 is where we're going to see this. Proverbs 22, verse 2 says this. It says that the rich and poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. The rich and the poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. The reason that we do one verse is because Proverbs are meant for you to remember them. So you remember the phrase, and then you remember the lesson behind the phrase. You remember the truth behind the phrase. And so this is the phrase, that the rich and poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. You can even shorten that to say the Lord is the maker of both the rich and the poor, right? And shorten that so you can remember it. But that's what the author of this proverb is saying, that the rich people and poor people have something in common. And some of your versions say that the rich and the poor people meet together. You might have a version that says the rich and poor people meet together. I think one even says that the rich and poor shake hands as equals. You might have that version that the rich and poor shake hands as equals. The NIV, the version that we're using, chooses the word common, but others choose the phrase meet together. And the reason they do that is because the Hebrew word here that expresses a concept. It doesn't translate into one word easily. It expresses a concept. And so it can't really be translated literally, even though we try to. And so some have chosen common, some say meet together, and some just give you a picture of two people shaking hands. The idea is that behind this is that regardless of their financial status, there is common ground between them. Common ground is maybe a way to look at it. That there's common ground between people, or no matter what their income, their stories do intersect, is another way to say this thought. That there's common ground between rich and poor people, or no matter if you're rich or you're poor, there is a way that your story intersects with someone else. You might think we have nothing in common, we are totally different, but your story does intersect. There is a point in life where, metaphorically, you do shake hands. You do have something in common with each other. That's the idea behind this phrase, that there is something in common. And that way, the way that the story intersects, the way that we have common ground, is that God, Yahweh, you see the word Lord there, all caps, and we've talked about that. Yahweh made both of them. Yahweh, God, created that rich person, and he created that poor person. And no matter what differences in life, they have that same commonality. They share that same common ground. Their stories intersect in that same way that God made and created both of them. This proverb uses the example of the rich person and the poor person. Two groups that when you look at their lives, if you think about the most rich and the most poor, especially in ancient Hebrew culture, they're on opposite ends of life. The rich person and the poor person, especially in this culture, they're on opposite ends of life. They don't appear to have anything in common. But the author says they do. They have one huge point of commonality. God made them both. In the record of Job's story, Job was a wealthy man that his story is recorded in the Old Testament, and he lost everything he owned. One of the wealthiest mans, that's not a word, that's how my son says it. One of the wealthiest men in history, he lost everything he owned, even his health. He lost his good health. And we read Job's story, the record of this event, and in his story there's a time where he begins to be introspective. He starts to look into his life and say, okay, what did I do wrong? Maybe this whole thing is a result of sin. What have I done wrong? What's wrong with my life? And he begins to investigate his heart, and check different areas. Is this wrong? Is this wrong? Is this wrong? He comes to the conclusion that nothing is wrong. But while he's investigating, he begins to think, maybe I've treated my servants unfairly. Maybe that's why this has happened. Maybe I've been an unfair master. Maybe that's my sin. And while he's considering that, he makes this statement in Job chapter 31. He says, if I have denied justice to any of my servants, doesn't matter their gender, whether male or female, when they've had a grievance of me, what will I do when God confronts me? Meaning, I can't stand up in front of God if I've been unfair to these people. What will I answer when called to account? Did not he who made me in the womb make them? Did not the same one form us both within our mothers? We're no different. We have this point of commonality. Job and his servants, though by all appearances looked different, they had one thing in common. God was the maker of both of them. God created both of them. The example in this Proverb 22:2 is the rich and the poor, and we'll get to why that's the example here in a little bit. But this goes beyond rich and poor. This goes beyond master and servant. The truth is Every single person. Every single person, regardless of social status, regardless of gender, regardless of race, regardless of religion, regardless of background, regardless of lifestyle, you name it, every single person has this in common. God purposefully made each and every one of us. If you want to name your differences, name your differences. But the truth is, God made every single one of us on purpose. Despite and in spite of our differences, we share this in common. God created you on purpose. Now one of the things that we struggle with, or maybe we think about, but, well, God didn't make us, right? This doesn't discount procreation. We won't get into that. But what this does mean is that God, and this is so awesome, that God takes that embryo in the mother's womb and forms that person. He shapes that child. He develops and he customizes that embryo. He's the force behind not just fetal development. He causes fetal development, but he also is the force behind the character and the personality of development of that person, of that baby, of that child. And when we say God made each and every one of us, he goes in and he shapes and forms and customizes that little embryo to become the person, not just in characteristics, but also in character, in personality, in interests. It's all because God made that person that way. That's what Job says in chapter 31. He says that God formed each of us inside our mothers. The poet king of Israel, David, he echoes the same truth in Psalm 139, maybe one you're more familiar with, verse 13. Talking to God, he says, God, you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. So once that embryo is formed, he takes it and he begins to shape it and knit it together. God is the maker of every single person in a very personal, in a very attentive, in a very purposeful way, unique to each of us in terms of appearance and, as David puts it, our inmost being. Not just how we look, but who we are inside. God created and knit and designed. He customized uniquely the way he wanted it. And though each of us is unique in how God customized us, there is something in our design, because all I've been talking about is how we're different. There is something in our design that we all share in common as well. It's not just that we were customized. That's what our Proverbs says, that God is the maker of all of us. We share this in common. God made each of us. David said he knit each of us when we were in our mom's womb. And Job says that master or slave, each of us were made, and that we do share in common. But there's another thing we share in common as well, and that is in our design, we have common ground. Because in his design of you and me, God also formed each of us in and around his image. We don't just share the fact that God made each of us. We share a commonality in our design because God made each and every one of us in his image. This is mentioned at creation, at the creation of the forming of Adam and Eve, the first man and woman in Genesis chapter 1. We see it here that God said, okay, let's make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky. And you'll notice as we read this that when he says we're going to make them in our image, he doesn't describe appearance, he describes character. We're going to make them in our image so that they may rule, that's authority, over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals and over all creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. So we see there's the first time that God said, I'm going to create man in my image. But we learn as we read through the Bible that this doesn't just apply to Adam and Eve. They're not the only ones that were made in God's image. They're not the only ones that God, in his work on every single person, he makes all of us in his image, which is why James in the New Testament, one of the New Testament authors, he basically says you should not criticize people for this reason. James chapter 3, verse 9, with the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, but he's being critical. But with it, we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. And the point is, you shouldn't be critical of other people because every person was made in God's image. The idea that each of us is made in God's image was mentioned at the creation. James says that's why we shouldn't criticize people, and it's also reflected at the very beginning in how serious God takes murder, or rather, why God takes murder so serious. In Genesis 9:6, it says, "Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed," because it's in the image of God that God made mankind. The reason murder, taking someone's life, is so serious is because that person was made in the image of God. That person was created by God, designed uniquely around the frame that is God's image. You don't take that away. It's not your call. So what does it mean that when God formed each of us, he made us in his image? He formed us. He formed you in his image. The word image that we've been using, it means, this is a word that only half of you will remember. It means facsimile. It means a copy, right? An accurate representation of something else. We don't do faxing very much anymore, right? So, but it means an accurate representation. The New Testament church understood that when this word was used in the Old Testament, image, it meant idol. And an idol is something that makes an invisible God visible. They would make a representation of a god. This is why God said, "Don't do this with me." They would make a representation of a god so they could see what that god looked like, so they would have an image of that god. It was an idol. Jesus was the exact image of God. Image, representation, copy, something that gives you the exact idea of what that thing is like. Jesus was the exact image of God. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3 says, the Son, Jesus, is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of God's being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. He was the exact image of God, so that when the world interacted with Jesus, they were fortunate, because when they interacted with Jesus, they would understand God. That's what John says in John chapter 1. He says that no one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known, has imaged him, has given us the exact representation of God, so that when you interacted with Jesus, you knew exactly what God was like. He was the image of the invisible God. We were created in the image of God. Jesus was the exact image of God, but we were created in the image of God. We were created to represent. We were created to make an invisible God visible. We aren't Jesus, though, but God created us to mirror God's characteristics, to reflect God, to image who God is. In the same way that a child, there are some kids, when you look at them, you think of their parent, or you hear their parent, or you watch their mannerisms and they're just like their mom or their dad. In the same way that some children mirror their parents, God made us, in his design of us, he made us to mirror, to demonstrate characteristics of himself, of our dad, of our father, of our creator. He made us to mirror him. What that means is love, creativity, authority, relationship, communication, and there's more, but all of those things are reflections of who God is. There are ways that we mirror, we image, that we were created in God's image. That's the image of God around which he formed our personality. What he does with how we love, he makes that into he takes that framework of his image, and then he takes our personality and makes some of us love hard. Right? He makes some of us love not as hard. He makes some of us really creative. He makes some of us constant communicators. He makes some of us with more authority, right? And he takes that image and he begins to knit into that little child, into you when you were just an embryo. He customized you. He created you. He made you unique, and he took his image and he began to build around it your personality, your interests, your characteristics, your character inside, so that we would reflect God Every single one of us, which means Proverbs chapter 22, verse 2, rich or poor, man or woman, white, black, Latino, Asian, teenager, or senior citizen, biker or stay-at-home mom, businessman or union man, married or single, you name it, every single one of us in this room and every single person outside of this building has this in common. God personally made you. Uniquely made you. Each and every one of us. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10 says it a really incredible way. It says that we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do, meaning He made us. We are His masterpiece, and He had a big plan. While He was putting you together in your mother's womb and creating you, He's got huge plans, huge ambitions to see what are they going to do with how I made them. We are His masterpiece because He carefully crafted us from embryo to birth, formed around His image. Now, I am not, some of you are, I'm a reader, but I am not an art guy at all. I don't get art. I'm not artistic. I don't get fine art. When I was in college, you had to do, for our fine arts class, you had to take a trip to go see an opera in New York City. New York City was cool. The Met was cool. The opera was in a different language. But the sets were really cool. I thought the sets were really awesome. But I don't get fine art. Paintings, all those things, I just don't get it. To be honest with you, I'd pick a Target or Bath & Beyond painting just as soon as I'd pick a Rembrandt, and I probably want to know the difference. I'd probably think mine was even better. I'd be like, yeah, but yours looks weird. Look at this one. This is a boat by a dock or something. I don't know. But here, for instance, this is a piece of art that, to my eye, it looks like it would be, when you look at this boy, to me it looks like it would be a picture inside an elementary school literature book. Doesn't it? Like some story that you would read in 5th grade, and at the beginning of the chapter or whatever, this picture would be on the other side to tell you the story is about a boy farmer that has to do everything by hand. So let's say for whatever reason, maybe you are, and if that's you, good for you. But let's say you're interested in 1800s farming-themed artwork, right? How much would you pay for this painting? If you were really, really into decorating your home with 1800s themed farm work, you're like, what I really need is a boy with a sickle. That's really what I need for my wall. How much would you pay for this, right? I'd say this is $30 at Hobby Lobby, which is 50% off, and that's a deal, right? Because Hobby Lobby's always got the sales. I'd say this is $30 at Hobby Lobby. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you're thinking 40 or 10. Some of you are like me. I want to actually spend money on this. I'm just saying. But, right, so to me, this looks like something you'd see in a literature book. You might recognize this next one, though, right? How much would you expect to pay for this one? Right, many of you recognize this one. This is what they call priceless, right? This is priceless. They estimate, I don't understand priceless because they say it's priceless and then they guess how much it would be worth, which means it's not priceless. So they estimate that this would sell, if they were to sell it, for well over $100 million. This is a Starry Night, right? This is a Van Gogh. Apparently he's a really good painter. If you were to ask me, I'd say the boy with the sickle looks better than this one, to be honest with you. If you put them side by side, I would say, okay, the boy with the sickle looks better. Yeah, to me, the boy with the sickle looks like it has more skill. But here's I'm not an expert, right? Here's the thing. They're both Van Gogh. Both of these paintings are priceless. The boy is the very first piece of art Van Gogh ever did. They're both priceless. Why? Look at them. Why are they priceless? They couldn't be more different pieces of art. To me, they look very different. Right? They couldn't be more different pieces of art, but what gives them value is who made them. It's not how different they are. What gives this, if you didn't know this was Van Gogh, you'd pay $30 for it. Now that you know, it's priceless. What gives them value is who made them, who created them. The value of the piece of art is in the artist. That's the point of Proverbs chapter 22, verse 2. The rich and poor have this in common, that the Lord is the maker of them all. That's why they use the example that he does, because from a financial perspective, rich people literally have more value than poor people do. From a financial perspective, a rich person is more valuable than a poor person. The point is that we see rich or poor, or whatever difference you choose to see, that you see, and we assign value based on what we see when it comes to people. We assign value based on what we see, but the reality is the maker is the same. The skin color might be different. The gender might be different. The affluence might be different. The religion might be different. They might wear a turban and you might not. But the truth is, the reality is the maker is the same. The creator is the same. And because the maker, the artist is the same, they have the exact same value. The value is the same because we were all created intentionally by God in His image. And so because we were all created intentionally by God in His image, each and every one of us is equally valuable. God purposefully made each of us, which gives us equal value. Every person is God's handiwork. Every person is God's masterpiece. Now here's the catch. Because some of you might be thinking this, and I know that a lot of us, we have our struggles, and you might be thinking about your own flaws, and you might be thinking about your own struggles, and you're wondering, how is that a masterpiece? Why would God make me with these flaws? Why would God make me with these struggles? How is this a masterpiece? I'm not this, obviously this is, but how is this a masterpiece? Why would God make me with this issue? Or maybe you're thinking about someone else's flaws. You're thinking about someone else's badness, someone who maybe hurt you in life, someone who you struggle with in life. And you're wondering, why would God make someone that way? How is that a masterpiece? How is that His handiwork? I mean, I'll ask it. Maybe some of you are thinking, but did God really make baby Hitler? And there's this whole philosophical conundrum about whether or not, if you could go back in time, would you kill baby Hitler? But did God really, from the time that he was an embryo to birth, did He really craft him, knit him together, and make him so that you could say that he was God's masterpiece? How is that possible? The answer is, yes, He did. God custom designed and uniquely designed every single person the way He wanted them to be. In His image, He carefully crafted every single person to mirror God. The catch is, our mirrors, the image of God in us, was broken by sin. Because at the same time, sin was also introduced into the design, and it broke that mirror. It ruined that image and twists and perverts the design that God made. And so He made us to love in the best way possible, and we love in the worst way possible. He made us with creativity, and we use that creativity to hurt people. He made us with communication, and we use that communication to slander and pull down. Or He made us with authority, and we use that authority to hurt other people. He made every single person. It's sin that destroys that image. It's sin that breaks that mirror. And imagine God's pain when we use our communication to hurt someone else. He must be thinking, that's not why I made you to communicate. That's not why I made you in my image to use that. That's not why I made you creative. That's not why I made you with those gifts. It's not why you were made with that intellect. It's a tragedy that sin broke every single one of our mirrors. It broke the image of God inside us. It corrupted that image. It distorted the design, which is why you have the flaws and you have the struggles. It's why that those issues are there. It doesn't change the fact that God created you and customized you and made you in a unique and personal way. And the good news is that the corruption, the twisting, the breaking, the shattering of that image isn't permanent. Because when we place our faith in Jesus and his ability to rescue us from the corruption and the consequences of sin and how it has distorted us, that faith begins the process of putting back together that broken mirror piece by piece, of restoring the image that God intended us each to have. Colossians chapter 3, verse 9 says that when that happens, when you place your faith in Jesus and his ability to save you from sin, it says that you take off your old self with its practices and you've put on the new self. And that new self is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. Renewed to be in that image again, to put those pieces back together. Because of sin's damage as Christians, then we are in the process of overcoming what sin has ruined in us to better and better reflect God. Because it's the responsibility of Christians to reflect God, to image God well, to demonstrate this is who God is. Just look at me. This is what God is like. It's hard, and it's a process. But remember, the point here is in Proverbs 22:2 is that every single person was created intentionally by God in his image, which gives every single person in the world equal value, regardless of design, regardless of differences, regardless of choices, or even the effects of sin on that person. God made every single person intentionally, uniquely, personally, the way that he wanted them to be. So the question for us this morning is, how do we apply this truth? How do we apply the truth that God made every single one of us the way he wanted, custom design, and that gives each and every one of us value? Well, the first and most obvious application is, to me, that in order to live a successful, godly life, we must keep our lives free of discrimination. If we want to live a successful and godly life, then we must keep our lives free of discrimination. James chapter 2 talks about this at the beginning. It says, "My brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, must not show favoritism. Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in filthy old clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing fine clothes and say, 'Here's a good seat for you,' but say to the poor man, 'You stand there,' or 'Sit on the floor by my feet,' have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts?" Ephesians chapter 6, Paul says this. He says, "Masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him." If we want to live a successful, godly life, because every single person was created by God uniquely on purpose, giving them equal value, then there is no place in our lives for discrimination. We must keep our lives free of discrimination. God doesn't show favoritism, and neither should we, inside the church or outside the church. Racism, chauvinism, xenophobia, you name it, there is not a place for discrimination in the godly life. In Galatians chapter 3, verse 28, Paul, again, he says this, "There is neither Jew or Gentile. There's neither slave nor free. There's no male or female. You are all one in Christ Jesus." And Paul makes this very clear. When it comes to salvation, that's what he's talking about here in Galatians. When it comes to salvation, it doesn't matter what race or gender or status you have. We are all equal in God's eyes. We share equal value. The death of Christ was sufficient for you just as much as it was for me, and it demonstrated the same amount of value. Realize the same price was put on your soul as it was every other person's soul. The exact same price. The price for our sins was equal. And how we treat each other, how we talk about each other, should reflect the value that God has given every person, regardless of what we see. We said this towards the beginning. You cannot judge a book by its cover. You must judge it by its author. And God is the author of every single life in this world. Which means that the godly approach to every single person is to live free of discrimination in our words, in our actions, and our thoughts. If we want to live a successful, godly life, we must keep our life free from discrimination. And for some of us, this requires a lot of prayer because we judge a book by its cover. But the reality is you cannot judge a book by its cover. You must judge that book by its author. And God made each and every single one of us. Another application is not just that in order to live a successful, godly life that we need to keep our lives free of discrimination, but if we want to live a successful, godly life, we must keep our lives free of quick judgment. We must keep our lives free of discrimination. Every single person has value. But we also must keep our lives free of quick judgment. Titus chapter 3, verses 2 to 5, Paul is writing to a young pastor, and he says that to remind the people to slander no one, to be peaceable and considerate, and always be gentle toward everyone. At one time, this is why you should be considerate, why you should be gentle, why you shouldn't slander, because at one time we too were foolish, we too were disobedient, we too were deceived, we too were enslaved by all kinds of passions and pleasures. We too lived in malice, we too lived in envy, we were being hated and hating one another, so were we. And we need to keep our lives free of quick judgment because this verse drives at the heart and explains it. Be gentle towards everyone because we all were and are broken images of God. You think they're broken. You think they look different. So do you. So are you. So were you. We were all broken. We are broken images of God. So that boss that's a jerk to you, you have something in common with him. You were both created by God, and what you are looking at as he is being a jerk is a broken image of God. That foul-mouthed coworker or neighbor, you are listening to a broken image of God, but someone who was created by God for something more than what they are right now. That neighbor whose lifestyle you don't appreciate, you are witnessing a broken image of God, but they were made by God just as you were. That family member who is unreasonable and irrational, spiteful and angry, God made them for something greater. He designed that person. You are experiencing a broken image of God. Just like you were, just like you are. That same-sex couple or transgender person you pass by, what you are seeing is a broken image of God. You were a broken image of God. They were created by God just as you were. And sin has distorted you just as it has distorted them. Every single person was created by God, and that gives them value. And we need to keep our lives free of discrimination and free of quick judgment, because at one time you also once were. What this means is that every one of those people around us doesn't need our quick judgment. They don't need our disgust. They don't need our avoidance. What that person needs is our immediate prayer and our gentleness, because what they need most is not our quick judgment. What they need is the gospel, because that's the only thing that is going to untwist what sin has done to God's image. What you are seeing is a broken image of God. What that broken image of God needs is the gospel to put it back together. They need your prayer. They need your gentleness. They need the gospel. They need Jesus, because he is what's going to restore that image. He is what restored your image. At one time, we also were that broken, but God saw value in us. And God saw value in them, and he paid the same price for both of our souls. I'm not saying that you have to approve of everyone's lifestyle. But you must see the broken heart, the shattered mirror inside. A person that needs help, not a disgusting mess that needs tossed out. No matter what their lifestyle, no matter how they look, no matter how they talk, that person was made personally and intentionally by God. He customized them. He had big plans for them. He had a huge design for their life. Choose to see that and see how much it's broken. If we see people this way and we keep our lives free of that discrimination and free of that quick judgment, it will stop us and help us to see their greatest need is Jesus. And it might even give us the courage to go talk to them. And it will help us respond in a godly way, the way that Jesus would, a way that's centered around the gospel. Because they have value. God made them exactly the way He wanted, and they are broken because of sin. Keeping our lives free of discrimination and keeping our lives free of quick judgment requires a lot of prayer, because we judge books by their cover. Because we look at them and we see that they're more broken than I am, or they're more different than I am. They live completely differently than I do, and it is easy for us to judge a book by its cover. But their greatest need is not my judgment of the cover. The greatest need is the gospel. And so if I want to live a successful, godly life, I can't judge a book by its cover. I must judge everyone by their author and see the value behind what's broken. And so that means we need to pray and pray hard that God will allow us to keep our lives free of discrimination, keep our lives free of quick judgment, and keep our focus on the gospel, which will fix every single broken soul in this world. Will you pray with me? God, I love you, and I love that you saw value in me. I don't know all the designs that you've had for my life. I just know how broken my life became. I know what sin has done to me, and I thank you that you saw value enough to send your Son for me. I thank you that you saw value enough to send your Son for every single person in this room, every single person in this county, in this state, in this world, that you love us. Will you please help us to rid our lives of discrimination, rid our lives of quick judgment, and see the value in every single person, and pursue your love in the gospel for those persons so that you can fix what we see as broken, so you can change their lives. Give us the courage, give us the bravery, and give us the commitment to see people the way that you do. I love you, God, and I pray this in your name. Amen.